Okay. Oh my goodness. Listen, some folks would argue that this is one of the best chapters in all of One Piece, at least the post-time skip. Other folks would argue that it's very, very far from. So I would say, without a doubt, there are ups and downs across the board for this chapter of One Piece. And I'm here for the most part to break them all down. So, first and foremost, if you have not seen my live stream reaction to the chapter, you can go to my Cole Requiem channel for that live stream reaction. And of course, the post-chapter discussion on my Twitch channel. That's number one. Number two is if you want to check out my One Piece episode reaction content, all that fun, edit, all that meme stuff, you can go to my Kingu-san channel, link in the box below for that, all that fun stuff, and unedited first on my Patreon. That's number two. Number three is that, as per usual, we're going to break down this chapter step by step, piece by piece. First will be the pacing and the chapter structure. Second will be the character components of the chapter. And then finally will be the story progression components of this chapter, which are meaty, absolutely well situated for the month of Thanksgiving. And finally, number four, for this video, we do have to give a brief word for today's sponsor. And of course, today's sponsor is none other than the Surfshark VPN.
Lovely.
So I'm willing to guess that most of you lads and ladies watching this video are weebs.
Correct, sir.
It is what it is. We are who we are, our chest held high, and we show the world unabashedly our appreciation of the culture of the land of the rising sun. But in doing so, sometimes we do venture into very dark and dangerous places where individuals that mean us no good, for damn sure, they are going to try and ruin our days, our weeks, our months, especially if it's crypto related. Woo!
My God.
Woo! So, if you wind up in these dark and dangerous places, whether they be rated M for mature or not, it's up to you. But the fact of the matter is that you're gonna want some protection when you do go to these places, and Surfshark VPN has your back. Not only does it have some damn good features, like the clean web feature that removes any ads, malware, or trackers that's gonna be there to ruin your day. And even though I love cookies, the fact of the matter is that I hate them online, but Surfshark VPN can easily handle cookies, making my online experience all the more better. Surfshark VPN is quite literally available on all your devices, and also quite literally available all around the world. And one last thing too, if you don't know, now you know, a lot of my content is region gated.
Nani?
But you can easily gain access to mine and other region-gated content easily with Surfshark VPN by simply changing the region where you're located in, and then boom, just like that, you'll gain access to all those features that previously you could not gain access to. So go in the description box down below. Use code KOL, that is KOL, to get a Black Friday deal special for this month of November to get not only 3 months free, but also 85% off of your purchase of Surfshark VPN. Once again, 85% off. So on that note, thank you Surfshark VPN for being awesome. Once again, use code KOL, KOL, and now let's get back to the video at hand. So first and foremost, let's get down with the pacing and the chapter structure. So this chapter has a total of 6 parts. The first part is real time on Egghead Island in the Labo phase. The second part is the first flashback, which is the original O'Hara flashback that Robbers are calling. The third part is that we come out of that flashback back into real time. Then the fourth part is that we go into a second flashback, a new flashback, months after O'Hara incident 22 years ago. Then the fifth part of the chapter is going back to Egghead Island, back to Labo phase. And then finally, the sixth part of the chapter, the final part of the chapter, is the Scrap Heat Fabrio phase area with Luffy and company. So in this chapter, we do jump a lot, for damn sure, between real time and flashback, real time and flashback. But because there were, let's say, no incremental leaps in time within sections, and it's just, again, that very simplistic structure, even though we do jump a lot, it is easy to follow and not all over the place. So overall, I would say that this chapter's pacing is good. Even though, again, there's like 6 parts to this chapter, I would still say that it is still nonetheless good for the overall pace and structure of this chapter. So now we have the character component for this chapter. Number 1, who would have seen this coming? Clover. Clover, apparently a mad lad in his heyday. He sailed the high seas back in the day like Captain Jack Sparrow, searching for these rare texts and other major historic finds. He was captured and imprisoned by the Navy 10 times, trying to actually match Kaido's 18 times that was stated in chapter 759. In the viz, they note to how he also escaped prison 10 times. That's not in the scans. That is the first thing for character, Clover. Now after Clover, number 2 for character is going to be Monkey D. Dragon. So we get to see for the first time a younger age dragon at the age of 33 years old. And he, at this point in time, is the captain of the Freedom Fighters. And because of the Ohara event, Dragon, at this point in time, vowed to create a military force that could fight back against the world government. And hence is the beginning of the Rev a few years from that point in time. And Vegapunk also notes to how Dragon has a distaste for war. But again, the events of Ohara pushed Dragon too far. This is new information with respects to the manga, but not in the sense of the overall story itself. It was stated in the Vivid Cards. Specifically, it's Vivid Card Data Book Volume 3. We're literally in this bio that's actually written by Library of Ohara. It literally states that at a certain point of his life, Dragon realized how rotten the world truly was, and he became convinced that it was his duty to change the world for the better. That incident that we heard about way back when in the Cards is the Ohara incident, now confirmed in the actual manga. There's also even a timeline as to when the Revolution Army was created. We have the between 24 years and 19 years, and what lies with that timeline is 20 years ago, of course, Ohara's destruction. And of course, lastly, in the Cards too, they also mention how his main objective is peace, with victories in war bringing nothing more than a means to achieve that, not something to enjoy. So that is Dragon. And then finally, of course, for character the last but not least, without a doubt, is Usopp. Usopp mentions Elbaf, and every Elbaf fanboy went crazy because like, okay, hold on, it's time. Elbaf is coming in full force. Last character is going to be Vegapunk. Finally revealed, exposed. Past versions and present versions, which are different. There are differences here between the past and the present very clearly. So let's get right into it. First and foremost, in the past, Vegapunk is an actual monster. Arguably the worst legs in One Piece history. He has insane tongue feats that of course model the iconic Albert Einstein tongue out face image. And then of course, we have that crazy head action, which is something that clearly is too much even for Pornhub. But here we are in One Piece, and Oda has no chill. So keep in mind that Dragon, right now in the story, he's 8 feet 5 inches, or he's 2.56 meters tall currently. So if his height was similar, probably smaller, but if his height was similar back in the past, then Vegapunk's skull could be around 16 feet tall, since his skull is dwarfing an 8-foot tall man. So it could be the case here where Vegapunk, with his quote regular body plus his disgusting head in the past, he could have been just as tall as Carter Curry. Oda and his proportions, oh my god. But again, it just shows you how vast, how crazy the world is. There are seldom a few cats that have skulls like that. In particular are 2, Vice Admiral Strawberry and Fukurokuju, that also have very tall heads, but trust me, oh, believe you me, I want to say that for another video. But again, like I said before, the man is essentially a monster. Very, like what's going on here? And if you missed this dude's widow peak, yo, even though his head's always cut off, like not at the end, but like during the flashback, it's actually always off panel. It's crazy. Outside of like a few like zoomed out panels. But when you see his widow peak, it's always off panel. And this thing is huge. Like his widow peak literally extends down for several feet. So that's Oda for you, okay? That's Vegapunk's hair for you. But for his character, he is, at this point in time, outside being like a mega genius, of course, he is blunt to a fault and doesn't care about the size he takes per se, as long as the man can get funding for his projects. Though keep in mind that he does lean, I think, towards the good side of things, because Vegapunk is talking to Dragon about how there are folks in the world government, particularly in the Navy, that are reasonable and good, earnest people. So Dragon shouldn't necessarily lose sight of the overall goal, because the entire thing is, quote, evil. There are some good figs in the rotten pile. And what also denotes to the, quote, good side of Vegapunk is that when Vegapunk Shaka is talking about how the soldiers that saw the books were ignorant, how Ohara won, when he was recalling these memories, we actually see him shaking a little bit in the actual real time. Like, there are these really small squiggles that are like around his face that indicates like shaking, emotional, and so on and so forth. And then we actually see it in the flashback panels where when he says the word giants, he's crying and there is mucus coming out of his nose. So he was truly awe-inspired and he was truly shook seeing that the people of Ohara, their last play to throw all the books into the lake, paid off the way it did. Their conviction to the history of the world, and that history being accessible to everybody, and it shouldn't be hidden and snuffed out. So that is Vegapunk in the past. But Vegapunk currently that we see at the end of the chapter seems to be a little bit different. First of all, his head has downsized tremendously, and it's actually likely to play on what happened with Einstein's brain, where after Einstein passed away in 1955, his brain was dissected into several pieces. So it's very likely that each of the Vegapunks that we see, 1 through 6, are created with an actual piece of his own mind, and eventually it downsized, so we see at the end of the chapter. Now, compared to the flashback version of Vegapunk, this Vegapunk seems to be a lot more chipper, a lot more kind of like goofy, and also I would say off the rip, and makes a lot of sense here, less intelligent. He makes the mistake with the Dome Shoe's hover function, and he flies up way too high as a result of that in the chapter, and he most likely made the mistake with some sort of warping device and bent space and time some crazy way, and he was semi-stuck inside the giant robot that Luffy Company are on. So obviously for the time being, because of these mistakes off the rip, he is probably less smarter than the Vegapunk that we see in the flashback. Also, he has some sort of, let's say, I guess a speech tick, where he keeps on saying like Requazar, kind of like, let's say, for example, Ulti would say Arinsu all the damn time. And then lastly, this Apple helmet that has some sort of rod that goes into his skull, which is, it looks pretty freaky, but also kind of funky, like in a dope-ish kind of funky way. But that being said, this apple, which is probably a play on Isaac Newton and how he deduced the formulation of gravity when an apple hit him on the head, I think this is actually a relay antenna that connects his being in some ways with the other satellite bodies of Vegapunk. So that is Vegapunk essentially. There is, I guess, one last thing too. Shaka the Good, of course, calm, cool, collected demeanor, never really breaking, even when recalling the events of Ohara. But also explains how Vegapunk, the original Vegapunk, memorized all of the books in the Ohara library that was salvaged after Ohara's destruction. So then this also confirms that a lot of the technological innovations that Vegapunk has created so far, that we've seen so far, are not, at least I'll say this, are not necessarily founded, the foundation of these things, on its own crazy, zany ideas, but they actually come from the ancient kingdom of old. Though remember that things that we see on Egghead Island, like the Ion AC, or let's say the Mechanical Sea Beast, things like these probably do stem from the research that Vegapunk was doing when they were a child on Karakuri Island and the country of Baltimore, because we do see some of those things there. And that is it for character when it comes to this chapter of One Piece. So now we get on to the story progression components of this chapter. And like I said before at the beginning of the video, not everyone is on board with this chapter being like one of the best chapters of all time. In fact, very far from. I think for damn sure this is a polarizing chapter, and I would argue for some very damn good reasons. So, first things first, what's not a reason is Germa 66 and Caesar Clown. Hey! So Germa 66, they have arrived back on Germa with a guest, Caesar Clown. So mission has succeeded. They have escaped. Apparently, they flew all the way from Whole Cake Island out of that Totland area and then back onto the Germa Castle area, the Vinsmoke snail boats. So they can literally fly for like a long distance. So that's overall story number one. Germa rescue mission is successful. And again, this took place probably during the raid on Onigashima or even like before that. That's the first thing. Second thing is that for story, Vegapunk, they explain their connections with Clover. And now for them, Clover, the archaeologist, did bring to light, in some respects, the ancient kingdom of yore. And there was also a machine that they found that they discovered somewhere else. And the timeline of that machine also matched the timeline of the Void Sentry. So this machine that they're talking about might be the giant robot that we see at the end of the chapter, and then of course last chapter as well. Or it could also be whatever we saw destroy the Lulusia Kingdom, because again, remember, Rob Gucci talks about how what happened with Lucia Kingdom may in some way relate to Vegapunk, hence why they're going there to kill Dr. Vegapunk. And then in a general sense, Shaka the Good just recites what we already kind of know about the Void Sentry and the Ancient Kingdom. And he recites his theories to, the key thing here, the rest of the Strat crew that's there. So Frankie, Nami, Usopp, and Sanji are now aware of this whole like Ancient Kingdom Void Sentry bit going on, where normally it was just really only privy to Robin. But now they all know, and as a result of them all knowing, at least the theory they could get killed. Because recall this too, in the horror flashback, Clover in 395 simply states what they all know right now is just hypothetical. So they don't know for certain, but they can make some damn good guesses, and their damn good guesses click. That's what we see in 395. So just having that theory could get you killed. Theory videos are deadly. Facts. But then that being all said, Vegapunk then reveals probably the first, no, definitely actually, the first major point of contention in the fandom, where he reveals that from chapter 397 onwards, those books that were thrown into the lake, they stayed there even after the Buster Call and the fire on the entire area and blah, 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 yada, yada. And Robin herself wasn't necessarily there to actually watch this happen, because at that point in time, she was running away with Jaguar D. Saul Goodman. And in this latest chapter, Shaka does essentially theorize that the soldiers who saw the books in the lakes, if there were any, which there were, that we do see in chapter 398, that these soldiers wouldn't understand the value of the books, which is why the books were allowed to stay there in the first place for months on end until Vegapunk, the Giants, and Dragon arrived. Now, obviously, this is a massive point of contention in of itself, because of the sheer simple fact that there were literal months of time between the destruction of Ohara and Vegapunk's arrival, where the books that contain this vast knowledge were untouched, preserved arguably in this fresh water, because if it's salt water, they would erode away faster. But like we see with Old Wano Country in chapter 1055, the fresh water preserves the integrity of the buildings even from 800 years ago. So why didn't the world government send anybody else to check on the Ohara situation? It was almost as if like these guys, the world government, who are so anal about any information about the Void Sentry being leaked, exposed, to the point where in this very same chapter we find out that Clover, in the quest of finding rare texts, was arrested by the Navy 10 times. Does it really make any sense that the world government, who are the superiors of these Navy soldiers that actually see the lake full of books in 398, that they don't send anyone there for months on end? I have a very hard time perceiving that. Let's say that these Navy men that we see in 398, they don't report a single thing to their higher ups about the books in the lake, which in of itself is very hard to believe. We see how efficient and effective the Navy and world government guys are during that flashback, to the point where Akainu literally kills all the civilians that are trying to escape just to make sure that none of the scholars are kept alive. Huh? And then now, after Buster Call, they don't send any remaining nothing, not even a single CP agent, not 0 through 9, nothing. When the text in that lake has the power to change the world. It doesn't make much sense because the time from here is not, let's say, hours or days or weeks, it's months. It's plenty of time for an organization that Eiichiro Oda has written to be very effective, very efficient, very anal, and very strict when it comes to the knowledge of the Void Century, to where if you even misstep, even Vegapunk in this chapter says, even despite my position, if I even talk about this, do a theory video on this, I am going to get clapped. The very same people, they didn't send one dude after months? I'm hoping that there's a follow-up on this. Like there's, let's say for example, during a point in time, there were other events that are going on in the world, and so they couldn't attend to Ohara because they were distracted with other events in the world. And then let's say later on, they did send CP agents, but they found nothing in the lake. I would hope that there was something, just anything. Like maybe Whitebeard or Big Mom was going crazy, then they had to like divert their attention to the new world. I am praying that there is something else there within that timeline that had to force their hand elsewhere. The Nika was one thing. That I think is fine, because the Nika, it's very clear that they didn't realize something. And then when they did find out that something, they immediately acted like, okay, damn. But this, no. This right here would be the definition of just gross negligence. So that is point of contention number 1. After this, we have again the new flashback material after Ohara 20 years ago, where we have the actual reveal of the past version of Vegapunk, and then we find out that Vegapunk's head, apparently according to Dragon, does grow. His head grows. What does that mean? According to Eiichiro Oda, Fukurokuju got mad at Raizo, and his head started to get taller, elongate. And then Strawberry, Vice Admiral Strawberry, who has also an elongated head, his head grows when he gets sad. And now all of a sudden there's another person whose head grows for somehow, some way reason. Because I've been saying it for like years, like since 2016, 2017, that there are some people that are just random as hell in the world of One Piece. And it all starts where? During the NL cover story. So the time is now, lads and ladies. The time is now. So that's that. But then Monkey D. Dragon. Dragon right now is the captain of the Freedom Fighters. And it's from this point in time where a few years later, he meets Luffy's mother, Crocodile. And they give birth to Monkey Jesus. So this is a pretty important time in Dragon's history, clearly, because this right here is right before the founding of the Revolutionary Army in this flashback. And we find out that Ivankov and Bartholomew Kuma are the major founders of the entire Revolutionary Army itself, which does make some sense here, because during Marineford War, when Ivankov started against Kuma in chapter 558, Ivankov did get annoyed at Kuma that he was willing to fire lasers at him so willy-nilly, even though they were old friends. And so now we have some insight here as to how old of friends they were. And also, this is before the time Kuma was captured and put into prison and made to a warlord, but of course after the time he was the king of the Sorbet Kingdom. There are things here that at some point in time they will link up, but we are getting snippets here or there of the past in some dope ways. And of course, One of the craziest ways is the fact that we see in the Lake of Books giants of Elbaf, and it's hard to tell who they are. The guy actually in the lake I can't tell at all, but the two above the lake, they could be Hydruden and Garrett, but I'm not too sure on that one, because Hydruden was in Dressrosa and he should be aware full well that Robin is from Ohara. So I feel like there'd be something there between Hydruden and Robin in Dressrosa, if that's actually Hydruden. But at this point in time, there's like nothing there. So again, not too sure. But the fact of the matter is that the giants have the library of Ohara. At least what they could salvage from the lake. And apparently they were led by a captain, and this giant captain, who at the time was covered in bandages, gave Vegapunk access to the salvage library of Ohara when they met him at Elbaf. So Elbaf is now important in another major way. Always has been and always will be. For me, it's ridiculous that some folks actually conceded the idea that Elbaf was going to be the arc that was hyped up before Wano Country would be like a 9-chapter Reverie or like a 20-chapter Zoe. No, it's Elbaf. Elbaf? Madness. However, here comes major point of contention number 2. Saul is the individual that Vegapunk is talking about, because we see the hat and the bandages. Now, potentially, this could be the burned man that Kin and Law referred to at the end of Wano Country, because it could be, let's say, ice burn, and let's say fire burn, or it could be the Firebird too, because Ohara, at the end of the flashback in chapter 397, was essentially a sea of flames. This is where I side on the no. I do not like this. And I think I'm very, very justified in my reasoning so far, at least, in not liking Saul being back. I know that some folks do like this, which to each their own, okay, friend of fine. And I did do a Twitter thread on this actually a few hours ago. I kind of break it all down, explain the reason why in a general sense, why I think this is a bad thing and I don't like it. Now we're gonna start this all off with a good old boy named Kuzan, at the time Vice Admiral Aokiji. So in chapter 397, we see Aokiji freeze over Saul 2 times. Number 1 is when he does the ice time capsule to stop Saul from running away. After Saul has that very moving speech about how no one is ever born into this world completely alone, then he walks up again and hits Saul with the ice time. So very important here, he does not the ice time capsule to freeze over Saul, he shuts down Saul's movements with the ice time capsule, and then he freezes all of Saul's body with the ice time. And seemingly he believed that he had killed Saul. And this is actually backed up in the post-Enies Lobby section of the Water 7 saga, where we have Robin and Kuzan talking back to back. And in their conversation, Kuzan says, and I quote, 20 years ago, the giant who fought for Ohara, Jaguar D. Saul, was a close friend of mine. From that day on, I continued where he left off and helped you escape from that island. Since he gave his life to protect you, it's my duty to follow you and make sure you don't waste your life. So Aokiji's intent here is very, very clear, based, at least I would argue. There were some folks on the Twitter thread that were really splitting hairs, like a lot of hairs. Just because he said the words gave his life does actually mean that he died, since the intent of giving someone's life up for someone doesn't necessarily mean death. Because then I have to assume here, and the assumption here is that Aokiji at this point in time, in the post-Enies Lobby saga, he lied. After all the things that Robin had been through, he lied to Robin at that point in time, which to me just seems inconceivable. Not only is it cheapen the Saul moment, which I think actually is like by default, it's already cheapened, but now we have to cheapen this moment in the story because now Aokiji lied to Robin? Whoa. Because the idea is that Aokiji actually spared Saul, and when he's telling Robin those words, he's masking the truth, aka lying. Again, no, I think that's insane. Because afterwards too, in this same chapter 433, it's very clear here that Aokiji's intent was to end the legacy of Ohara completely. Let me continue reading from that point on. But even after 20 years, you still hadn't found anyone or anything you could rely on. I decided that I couldn't let a ticking time bomb run around under my watch. Frankly, I assumed that you had a death wish. I had intended that Enies Lobby would end the story of Ohara once and for all. But of course, I never expected that your friends would beat CP9. So the very fact that Aokiji had intended to end Ohara's legacy with Robin before Luffy and company beat CP9 contradicts the theory at this point in time that Aokiji spared Saul and then later on lied to Robin about Saul being alive, or at least masked the truth, let's say, because if he genuinely intended to end the legacy of Ohara, that couldn't happen if Saul is still alive with the actual library of Ohara. This is also stemming off of the end of Long Ring Long Land. In chapter 320, Aokiji seemed very intent on killing Robin, albeit in a lazy way, but he was very intent on killing Robin, but Luffy and company shut it all down. And then also in that thread too, some folks are saying that, well, ice time doesn't kill. That's not true, because we know this in chapter 321, where we have Chopper and Usopp trying to decipher what to do. And then they say, and I quote in the same chapter, "She can't breathe, can she? I think she's in a near-death state. Won't she die if we don't hurry? But if we warm her up too quickly, she could crack. We have to warm her from the inside." Later on that same chapter, on that same page, Chopper says, and I quote, "I've never seen a person completely frozen. Aokiji said that she's still alive, but I don't understand how." So the whole point here is that they, Chopper and Usopp, have to hurry in thawing Robin properly. Because if they were to leave Robin as she were, she would eventually die. Ice time is lethal. It does kill, but it doesn't kill you initially. You are fine initially, but over the course of time, you will die. So now we get back to the original question here. How did Saul survive Ohara? It's very likely that Aokiji did not spare Saul. Aokiji essentially failed to kill Saul. The reason why is because of two things I'd argue. Number one, he's a giant. Number two, the fire. So in chapters 396 and 97, we see Saul's strength on display. And the dude can pick up an entire marine ship and throw that ship into another ship. So he's a very powerful individual for sure, number one. Number two is that because there was a raging fire in the area, it's very likely that fire did help Saul escape ice time. But here's the key detail. Normally, this wouldn't work on a regular individual. We have to defer back to chapter 321. If we warm her up too quickly, she could crack. That means that Robin, later on Luffy, if they're not thought out appropriately, they would die. If Usopp went to the stove, grabbed a hot-ass frying pan, and then he put that on Robin's ice time frozen over arm, her arm would crack off and she would lose that arm forever, because the temperature differential between the frying pan and the ice time would be too great and it would cause the arm to crack. So a raging inferno, and then Saul, it's even worse. It's even worse. So again, Saul should be dead here.
But wait!
But he's a giant, not a human. And giant physique is way more powerful innately than a human physique. And the reason why Saul's got advantages is because Saul's able to actually get out of the ice time, but took massive damage in the process, but he can survive ice time because of his natural giant physique. That, I think, is the best, safest option when it comes to why Saul is alive. Because ultimately speaking, I think is the option that creates the least amount of damage. There's still damage nonetheless. Part of the reason why that flashback is so damn good, it's so impactful, is also because of Saul. The amount of time that Robin spent with Saul for like 4 days in the flashback, and then Saul actually going up there and saving Robin, and then Saul having the last day, all that stuff is phenomenal. It is amazing in that flashback. It doesn't change the fact that Robin's mother, at least probably, I mean, at this one time, maybe she could be alive too. No idea. Either way, Robin's mother, Clover, the archaeologists are all dead. Fair enough, fine. So it's still high impact, but you're removing undeniably some of that impact when you return that character Saul to life. Thereby the flashback in my book becomes a worse flashback. And I'm not saying that it's bad now. No, of course not. But it's not as good as it was before chapter 1066. In my mind, in terms of sheer impact, it's like comparable to altering or changing other high impact moments and other, let's say, flashbacks. So for example, let's say in the Frankie flashback, it's not Frankie's ships that destroy the town that Cypher Poe take control of. Let's say it's some random ships, and then Frankie never denounces his own ships from Tom Sand. If you want a more, let's say, one-to-one example, it would be like Fisher Tiger in the future is revealed to be alive. I'm not buying that sauce, and mind you, what I think is going on now is worse than that. Alabasta would be better if Pell did die. Wano Country would be better if Kinemon and Kikunojo did die. Sometimes it is better if it's more ambiguous. Let's say, for example, Yorkie in the Brook flashback, his status is actually still unknown. So he may come back in the future, maybe. But if someone like Homing, Dofi's dad, were to come back into the story, I got problems. And that's why ultimately I am not a fan of this moment at all. Not at all. And I'm not saying that you can't be. For you, if nothing changes, congratulations. But for me, it absolutely changes. The finality of an event like that in of itself has a tremendous amount of weight. But it's not final anymore because we know that there's gonna be another Dereshishi coming up in the future. And now that that's done, now we get to the rest of the chapter story, which I'll keep brief because it's relatively simple. We have Vegapunk. He does reveal he has memorized all of the ancient texts in the new Library of Ohara. Then of course we have Robin, who is very excited to see that Saul is alive. And then of course we have that shift to the scrapper area where we do see the Vegapunk, Rayquaza, like Rayquaza over here, saying his little weird speech tick as he's like somewhat submerged into a robot, yo. And then this man was talking about space-time getting twisted. What is he talking about, yo? What is he doing on his free time, yo? Warp? Wait, as in like a Stargate warp? Something you would see like apparently in like a Star Trek? Like that kind of warp? We have Law's warping. Then we have Von Augur's warping. Now we have Tech doing the same thing that Law and Von Augur can do. Albeit, Vegapunk did mess it up. But again, I think that because his character right now is kind of doofy and oofy because he's missing a lot of his brain material. Whew. That's tough. So where this goes, I think there's options. Von Augur has the warp fruit. Usopp has warping tech. I'm getting excited, yo. The possibilities of technology in the world of One Piece are endless, baby. They're endless. Woo! Okay, that may require a video in the future too. The endless possibilities of tech. Endless, man. Yo. I would just love to see Usopp warp around with the sniper. That'd be fun as all hell. All right, so the final thoughts of this chapter, okay? Once again, I do like where we are going for the story. I like it a lot. We are giving a lot of credence to Elbaf. And I know folks say, well, hold on now. Oda said that the story's gonna end, let's say like 5, 3, 4 years. No, just don't believe Oda. There is literally a chance here where the story has another 8 more years, 9 more years left, like honest to God, because there's so much material that we have to kind of get to. The Versus Yonko saga is a piss long saga, yo. Wano Country, one arc was 4 years. And we have a lot of material going for the Rev 2. The Rev have been needing a lot of material. So we have Law versus Blackbeard going on in the background. Then we have Rev stuff involving Dragon and so on and so forth. Then we have the stuff involving Elbaf. So we're really like ramping up the final saga stuff. And it looks like everyone is going to appropriately get their time in the sun. I just really need more details on this whole book thing, because that book thing with the lake, nah, like there's gotta be something, man. Because like, really? It's like all you need is one man, a few barrels of oil, dump it in there, light on fire. Gorosei, it's like really easy. Second thing, I'm not gonna lie to you. I definitely do wish that Saul is dead. I wish that they kept Saul dead. D-E-A-D, dead. I know folks like it, but understand that other folks don't like it too, and I'm on that camp. I'm on the no. I'm not. No. Again, I gave you the best option. I think Saul survived because of giant physique and the fire. If Saul was actually spared by Aokiji, oof. I'm not going to ignore that this chapter does wonders for the story progression, major character reveals. Yeah, and also the pace is good. So in my book, this chapter I think is a good plus chapter. But this chapter could be amazing, like a 9 out of 10. But again, for me, the Saul thing right now is a hardcore net negative. And it could get worse in the negative, like a -10, or it could get better, let's say -2. Or -1. Right now it's like -5, but it's overall still a net negative. It just depends on how much of a net negative is going to be. That's the main thing I have right now when it comes to Saul. This really could have been a 9, like a 1.5 higher if Saul was just dead. But no, like even the books I could forgive it to some degree. But no, again, I know I'm getting ragged on. Like, oh my God, what? It's still a 7.5 out of 10. It's not bad at all, but it's also not great.